Hello and welcome to the Reflecting Light Show. I am your host, April Rodgers, and I'm so glad that you are along for this journey. We have with us today James Doughty. James is a friend of mine, and he is also the pastor at First Monroe. So welcome, James. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you for having me. I've been keeping up with the show, and when you asked me, I was like, I don't know what I would say, but thanks.
We have a lot to talk about.
I appreciate you asking me.
We have a ton to talk about. So you and I first met in seminary for New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. I was going for my master's in theological studies. What was yours?
I ended up switching. I think it was in preaching, and then I could finish quicker if I did like mentoring or something. So I just switched, but it was master's in mentoring. Yeah.
And you were newly married, and then Kirsten, your wife, was pregnant with Piper, I think, while we were there.
That's right. Yep.
So that's been a few years ago.
It has been. I'm glad that's behind me.
Me too. Me too.
I'm glad. That's what somebody was asking, like, hey, are you going to go for your doctorate? Are you going to go more? I'm like, maybe.
Yeah.
I just don't feel like doing that right now.
Somebody asked me that too, and I said, I think I got what I needed.
Yeah. My plate's kind of full right now, so I was like, right. I mean, it'd be good, but
I'm glad I did it. Aren't you?
I am. There was a lot of really good things that came from theological education. I'm so grateful for it, but it definitely doesn't give you everything you need for real ministry. I mean, it gives you a good base and for study of Scripture and preaching and those kind of things, but it doesn't prepare you fully, for everything.
One of the things that the Lord taught me through that time was that I was spending so much time learning about Him that I wasn't really spending time with Him.
Yeah.
And there was a woman who came into my life, and she said, there's a difference. You need to make sure that you are spending time with Him, because they say that seminary is sometimes called cemetery.
Yeah.
Because you get in there and you think that you're spending all this time with Him, but you're not, because you're just learning about Him and writing papers and doing the next thing and trying to check off the syllabus list, and you're not really having that intimate one-on-one time with Him unless you're intentional.
Yeah, well, that's like Craig Rochelle has this quote, which is really good but convicting. Is like, just because you work for God doesn't mean you're close with God. And it's that whole deal. And like, anybody that's in ministry, there's a book, and I don't know if you've read it. It's by Paul Tripp called "Dangerous Calling," and it is one of the best books for ministry, because that's the whole thing. Is like, so much of like, especially guys or girls that come out of seminary, you're like, oh, I have all this theological education, and like, I know everything, and it just sometimes feels private. What's Paul talk about, that knowledge puffs up, and so we think like, oh, I know everything, and the reality is, I really don't know. I know some things about theology, but that's not enough, and you can trend a lot toward Phariseeism and like moving in that direction, because you can think, oh, I know a lot of things, but that doesn't mean we're connected with Him.
That's right. That's right. That's a good distinction. Okay, so you are the pastor at First Monroe, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, but because one of the things that I love that you guys are doing is being so community-minded. But before we dive into that, let's talk a little bit about your journey and how you even got started in ministry.
Okay. So it started early for me. I was at a youth camp, I remember in 7th grade. Tony Moretta, I don't know if you know, Tony Moretta was preaching and at a centrifuge in Union University, and I heard him preach, and man, I just felt God's call, and I was like, man, I want to do that for the rest of my life. And I think my first sermon was at 15. I always say my pastor, Dr. Wimburn, he let me preach at 15. I was like, man, he must have been insane to let a 15-year-old get in the pulpit.
I love that, though.
But I mean, even from that moment, I just felt God just saying, this is what I created you for, is to teach people God's word and to love my word. And so I mean, from then I knew that's what God wanted me to do. And so I ended up going to play football at Mississippi College for just a bit, and then I tore my shoulder up and didn't do that. And then I ended up going to LSU. I joined a fraternity, which my mom didn't approve of initially, but it was a great, one of the things that I always tell people, that one of the things that prepared me the most for ministry was being in a fraternity.
Yeah.
And learning how to manage the fraternity. I was president of our fraternity at LSU, and man, that equipped me a lot for being a pastor, and so it was really good. So I did that, and then after I moved to Birmingham and went to seminary in Birmingham for a little while, and then that's when I came to New Orleans and did seminary there with you, and I was the youth pastor at First Rabel for a little while.
Yes, that's right.
And then I got the call to go to First Monroe.
So you met your wife down at LSU?
I didn't. So we grew up we met in the 4th grade. And so
Really?
we grew up our whole life together. We never dated. We were great. It's the weirdest thing. We had this picture with our class rings. Everybody got class rings, and I got a different class ring, and she did too. And we have this picture with our hands over the top of each other that our moms took together,
Wow.
which is just weird.
Yeah.
And so we didn't actually start dating until after I graduated from LSU. And so I think I was back home for like 2 months.
Yeah.
And we just hit it off, and I knew her family, she knew my family, and so anyway, we started dating then, and so we kind of dated long distance a little bit during my time in Birmingham and got engaged. And
that's great. That's a good story. Okay, so let's talk about your job as a minister. And I know that there's a lot of ups and downs, and you and I have been at this for a while now. Not as long as some people in the ministry, but we've been just trying to be faithful with the calling that the Lord has put on our life. But has there been a moment in that ministry and in your calling where you felt like, man, like I might be in a season of darkness here?
Yeah, for sure. Every Monday. Every Monday. That's what everybody says. That most pastors want to preach. Most everybody on Monday. But and that's the thing is that, and people may not know this about ministry, but man, I think discouragement is something that I have to address often in my life. I remember one time, and I think I told you this yesterday, that it's about 2 years ago. There was something that had taken place in our church, and it just really got to me, and I was so discouraged. And I can remember coming home. It was a Saturday. I was struggling with my sermon. This was going on, and I remember just coming home. It was like, I'm ready to write my resignation letter. I'm ready to turn it in.
Wow.
I'm done. Because I think there's something frustrating with not seeing fruit. It's like, man, I'm pouring, or I'm trying to pour all this out. I'm trying to do all these things, and just not maybe seeing what I wanted to see or whatever. And I was so discouraged. And I remember my wife is so wonderful, Kirsten, and one of the things that she was like, James, you need to go get along with Jesus, and she was like, you're not quitting on this thing, thinking because she's just been such a rock for me of just like, you're not doing this, she just was speaking life. And she was like, you're not writing a resignation, and I think I more said that maybe to be dramatic to her, just in that moment, because I just you have a pity party for yourself, but. I remember this, and one of the things I always try to do, especially in sermons, is just try to be authentic and real and to be open. And that Sunday, it just timed up perfectly with the sermon. And I just opened up with the church. It was like, hey, church, yesterday I thought about writing a resignation letter, and I'm just really discouraged. And man, it was the most beautiful. I saw a picture on my phone, and it's like in that moment, the church stopped, and they said, you're going to come get down here. They knelt down, and they all just surrounded me and started praying for me. And it was just one of those moments where I was just like, yeah, I can't quit this thing, but it was just, it was just such a wonderful moment that the church just was like, hey, we love you, man. And you're not alone in this. And I think a lot for me is, and I don't know about for you in discouragement, but I'm the type of person that I can bear a lot of things for a long amount of time, but I end up hitting my breaking point. And I wasn't letting people in. I wouldn't even let my wife in on just certain hurts and pains and discouragement that I was feeling. And that was one of the things that came out of it was Kirsten was like, you've got to talk to me. You've got to open up about this stuff. If you get discouraged, tell me so I can pray for it. Let's not get to the point where you're ready to resign. Let's not get to that point. Let's, along the way, and several friends, ministry friends was like, bro, talk to me, and so a lot of good came out of it, but
I like how you said that you were vulnerable enough to get up in front of your congregation and just tell them, I'm struggling with this, because I think that in ministry, a lot of times we feel like we have to have it all together. And that's probably why you got to that point, why you had let it go on for so long. And just being authentic and being real with them open up the door for you to get the encouragement that you needed, because this job is a thankless job. A lot of times it's a beautiful job because you get to see the freedom and you get to see Christ come in and be the rescuer, but at the same time you can be pouring and pouring and pouring and pouring and pouring and never receiving anything.
And I think for me, I love I was looking up today, I think it's 1 Samuel 30. It's that scene of David, and it's when they had come and taken all the wives and children away, and he said that the people were bitter and they wanted to stone him. But I love the line that it says there. It says, "But David strengthened himself in the Lord," and I love that line that it says that. That's because good. So much you don't have to be in ministry for like a ministerial position, but just in general is I think so much of the time we get so discouraged or empty because we're not filling ourselves with Jesus.
Right.
We're just going and going and going,
right.
And then it just gets. Jesus was pretty clear. I always think about it when he says, "Abide in me. I'm the vine, you're the branch, and apart from me, you can do nothing." And I think sometimes I take that as a suggestion, and Jesus no, seriously, you can't bear fruit or you can't do anything if you're not with me and connected to me. And it was kind of a wake up call for me. I was like, man, I know this sounds weird for a pastor to say this, but I've got to make sure I'm with Jesus. I can't just go through the motions and do the ministry thing and not settle on alone time with just me and him, so that I can pour my heart out to him. He can fill me with his spirit. And because I think a lot of times when I hit discouragement, it's I can easily look up as man, I haven't been being with Jesus.
Yeah.
And not that I'm just with Jesus so that I'm full, but it's man, that's my lifeline. And if I'm apart from that, it's never a good place.
And that's exactly what we were just talking about in the beginning, going back to seminary too. If you were not spending time with him, but we're just doing things for him or learning about him, then we're missing the mark. We're missing what we should be doing. So what does that look like in your everyday life? How do you fill yourself up with him first?
So I listened to this sermon a while back by Matt Chandler, and it was so good. It was based out of Philippians 3, but it was talking about the one thing that we're to pursue is to be with Jesus. And I love he phrases it this way. He says, you need to be thinking what stirs your affections for Jesus? And then he asks the question, what hinders your affections for Jesus? And he's whatever stirs your, pursue those things. And so when I listened to that sermon, I started writing down, all right, what stirs mine? Sometimes that may be different, because he listed this thing. He loves to go around cemeteries, which was real weird. And he was I acknowledge that's weird, but he was when I'm around that, I think about death, and it puts things in perspective for me. And so for me, one of the things is, and I've done it quiet time, but I've done things different ways. And for me, getting up early is probably the best for me. I always tell myself, I think I'm better at night, processing things, but I know my day gets away from me, and getting up early in the morning. And Chandler says this, and I would say this for me too, of angst-filled worship, to listen to, and not that all music isn't passionate, but I love when there's listening to worship music that's just filled with such passion. It fuels my heart, and it fuels my worship for Jesus. Doing those things, I think, existing in an authentic community, being able to be real and authentic with people, stirs my affections for Jesus. And so for a lot of it was just trying to identify those things, hey, what is the thing that stirs your affections for Jesus? And then you need to pursue more of those things.
Yeah, that's really good.
So.
And it's not rocket science. It's just what you're saying. You find what it is that ignites that inside of you, and then be diligent to do that.
Yeah.
So that's really good.
Yeah, and sometimes I was preaching on this yesterday, but I love it. 2 Corinthians 11:3, and it says that I'm afraid, it just says, the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, that you would be led astray from a simple, pure devotion to Jesus. And I love that line, because because that's what it is. It's a simple, pure devotion, and there's so many things that distract from that. And we know this. Walking after Jesus is not easy. But it is simple. When you really get to the heart of it, and sometimes we just complicate following Jesus and being with Jesus when it really is simple. But sometimes the enemy does a great job with it, of leading us astray and getting us distracted with so many other things, or discouraging us, and we miss it. Hey, it's really very simple. You know, just being with him.
Absolutely. So. That's right. Well, we're going to take a short break, and then when we come back, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah.
We would like to thank today's sponsor of the Reflecting Light Show, John Ray Realty. The John Ray Realty Group is well known and well respected, not only by competitors, but also by closing attorneys, lenders, and suppliers of the real estate services in the Northeast Louisiana market. Their motto is, "We tend to business." Visit johnrayrealty.com today. Welcome back to the Reflecting Light Show. We are here with First Monroe's lead pastor, James Doughty, and we are talking about not getting discouraged inside of ministry. But I really think that this is a good message for anybody and everybody, because we all have a calling on our life and we all are called to be ministers of the gospel. So this isn't just for pastors or people in the ministry. This is for everybody. And I think about that verse in Galatians where Paul tells us to not grow weary of doing good, because in the right time we will reap that harvest. And that is a verse that I've been able just to hold on to and know that there will be days when I will feel a little weary. But if I can know that my strength comes from Him, just like you were talking about earlier, whenever David said that, knowing that my strength comes from the Lord, then I can keep pressing on, and then that harvest comes. And the harvest is the souls and watching people come to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, which is the end all be all. That's what we do. That's the whole point.
Well, and that's like when you that was a scripture that has been in my mind. Don't grow weary in doing good. And like I think about Paul has to write that because there's a tendency for us to grow weary. I mean, in 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians, he talks about I do not lose heart. So what that tells me is we have a tendency to lose heart. We have a I mean, there is a tendency he has to write these things to us because we do get discouraged. We do lose heart. We do grow weary. And I think it's in him writing that of acknowledging hey, we do enter in moments or seasons, that we just get discouraged.
We get worn down and one of the things that you and I had briefly discussed is about quiet time and what does that look like. And then we had the conversation about how sometimes you may not have this big epiphany every single time you sit down in your quiet time with the Lord, but just being consistent to open it day after day after day. And even if you don't feel Him working, He's still working. So let's talk a little bit about that and just kind of give some hope to maybe somebody out there is in a dry season and he or she feels like, okay, I've been waking up, I've been reading my Bible, but I cannot hear the Lord. What do you do whenever that happens?
I calls it these desert moments, and where it just seems and of course, again, I think a lot of us go by feelings. Not that feelings are bad, but sometimes they're I don't feel it, or and there's actually, and I told you this yesterday. There's on my phone. It's the cover of my phone. It says consistency is the key. And it's that can apply to a lot of different things, but especially spiritually and it's I heard this past November, I went through this devotion book, and it was a call of personal revival, and I was going through it, and that's one of the things that I'd indicated in my own life of just noticing I'd gotten really laxed on my personal time with Jesus, and it had become sporadic. I wasn't satisfied with it. And I remember out doing that, and I was reading this book called A Praying Life, and it was this it's I just felt the Lord just speak in of just James, just keep showing up. Don't,
it's good.
Don't overthink it. Just keep showing up. I promise you I'm working. I promise you I'm doing something. And I think sometimes, and again, maybe it's the performance driven world we live in, but it's we want it now. I want to see God, and does God move in just miraculous ways in an instant, a moment? Absolutely. And we've seen that probably in our own life and other people's life, but a lot is this process of sanctification. It's a journey. Why do they call it a walk and not a run? They don't call it your run with the Lord, they call it a walk with the Lord. And it's because it is, it's a journey, it's a walk. And I think because of that, I know I do. You're just I feel I should be farther along, or I feel I should not, a sin rears its head again, and you're I thought I was over this thing, and sometimes you feel you take one step forward and two steps back in your spiritual journey, and it was just the Lord was James, keep being faithful, keep showing up. I promise you I'm working. I promise I'm doing something, whether you see it or not. I'm doing something. And I think it was just this reminder of the Lord for me. It was just keep showing up, keep being consistent. I'm working. Don't doubt that,
And I think for me too, whenever I do keep showing up and I'm consistent in it, I might go a month without hearing anything, and whenever we say hear from the Lord, it's not this audible, it's the still small voice that we have inside of us. But I might go for a month and just being faithful to read his word and to pray. And then that one morning that I get up, then it's like the Holy Spirit just meets me right there where I am. And I'm so glad that I didn't give up, that I showed up for that I woke up and I had that minute with him because it was worth it, And then I also thinking about, I had some loss in my recent past, and I was calling out to the Lord. I was like, where are you in all of this? Where are you? And I can remember people giving me messages, and they were encouraging my heart, and they were saying, don't give up, don't give up. Like, you're such a light for us. Please, don't lose that light. And it wasn't that I doubted God's faithfulness or his goodness. It was just like, where are you? I need to hear from you. And he did. He just showed up, and he showed up with the sunrise, actually. And he said, this is who I am. I'm faithful to the end of the age. And so in that moment, I was so glad that I was there to hear from him on that.
Because I think it's just when we think about in seasons, and I think we all enter into seasons where we're just discouraged. God, and one of the things I always say, and I always think of the Psalms, like God's a big boy, and God can handle our honesty, and God can. I mean, we just take it from the Psalms. I mean, they're questioning God. God, where are you? Like recently, we were walking through the book of Matthew, and there's a scene where John the Baptist, like this great person, and he's in jail and about to be killed, and he's getting his disciples to seek Jesus and be like, hey, are you really the Christ? And you're like, wait, what? Like, you're the forerunner of the Christ, and you're questioning if he's the Christ. But I think it's those moments of where, so I think a lot of discouragement comes from when what my expectations don't meet my reality. And so it's like I had this, like I expect it to be this way, and when it doesn't happen that way,
that's right,
and we get discouraged. And so I think John's like, I expected this thing to, like this to be different. Like I'm in jail about to get beheaded. And so like I expected this thing to,
where are you?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I love it. It's almost like this idea of like faith-filled doubting, of like in your doubt, in your discouragement, like it's in those moments to lean into faith and lean into him. Don't pull away in those moments, because I love John. Like, I mean, he's like leaning into his doubt, like, are you really the Christ? Good. Because I think, I don't know, Kirsten and I talk about it all the time of just, we have these expectations of things, and when they don't pan out the way we think, and just it sets us up for discouragement. And it's in those moments of, God, you meet me in that, and you're with me in that, and God, you know these things, and that God, it's like many times I just need to be reminded, God, you're faithful, and whether I feel it or not, or whether it's working out the way I wanted it to. And I think that's any Christian. If you've been Christian any long enough, you're going to hit a point where you're like, God, what are you doing? And this is not what I expected, because like, why am I going through this storm right now? I think that's disciples. Like, so here's what I was thinking of. If you remember the scene, I think it's at Mark. He's on the boat. He's sleeping on his cushion pillow, all that kind of stuff. And they pose this question: do you not care that we're about to die? And I love that, because I think in moments where we feel discouraged of these storms, I think we have to pose the question, like, God, do you really care about me? Like, if you really cared about me, would you allow me to walk through this thing? And I love what Peter says, that we can cast our cares upon the Lord because he cares for us. And it's like in these moments to remind ourselves, like, God so cares for us. And it's like in those moments I can lean into him, and I can bring my honesty, I can bring my pain, I can bring my disappointment, I can bring my discouragement, and I can lay it at his feet because he cares for me, And
he's not astonished by our weakness. And he says his power is made perfect in our weakness. And so whenever we do bring it to him, then it is as relying on him and his strength to get us through. It's beautiful.
And I think that's really hard, because I love that verse, but that also means I need to be weak. And it's like, I don't like weakness, and it's like in those, like going through it, like, I don't like that, but it's like, but he's like, but in those moments, like, and Kirsten, we were talking about this the other day, and she was like, it's the moments where I've walked through the storm, the moments where I've felt the discouragement, when I felt like God abandoned me. It's in those moments. It's like Jesus draws so much closer.
Yes.
You know, I don't necessarily like the storm. I don't necessarily like those hard seasons and desert moments and seasons in our life, but yet sometimes it seems like I hear the Lord the clearest in those seasons, and it's like He like draws me super close in those moments of like, I promise you I hadn't left you. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's good. I love that. Okay, so let's transition and talk a little bit about your church and how you are so community minded, because I remember there was one instance where I was hearing stories about y'all taking in homeless people and this like putting them up on cots inside the church, and you have a true love for the community and for the lost. So talk a little bit about that and what your church does to just promote a community mindset.
Yeah. Well, I would just acknowledge this too. Like, I think there's so many churches in our community that are so community minded and that love our community. And I think, and I just say this, we talk about being a light. I think the church has an amazing opportunity to be a light to our community. Yeah. And the church, I say the community needs us as the church to step up and to do those things. And you know, what you're referring to is this was a couple years ago when the Salvation Army closed. And I remember it was closing. There was a bunch of meetings with a lot of different pastors and people in the community trying to figure out like, hey, what do we do? What do we do? And I remember just like, it was like, felt from the Lord of like, hey, y'all are located downtown. Yeah. Like you're right there by it. And I went to the church. I didn't know how, because you're like, hey, we're about to house all these homeless people at night. And it was kind of like I didn't, but then it's like I started to think like, man, if we're like wanting God's blessing and we're wanting to see God move, and then just to turn away the poor and needy would be like, that's like completely against his heart. Like, I was like, if we want to be aligned with his heart, like, then that looks like maybe it's just open up our buildings. Okay, if something, let's just go for it. And so that's kind of what we decided to do, and it ended up being longer than what we thought it was. But it's just one of those things of just, hey, there's a need, and it's a lot of, and I know you've heard this a lot. It's like see a need a need, and so it could be really big like that, or it could be something small in our community. And it's one of the things I try to tell our church, and I think sometimes we can in churches like wait on the church to schedule an event for us to serve, and it's like, hey, like that churches do that, and I'm thankful all the churches in this area, they have mission trips that they plan, they have community things, they step up when hurricanes hit. Like churches, I think, do a great job with organizing things in order to send the troops out of the church to do things, but like don't wait on the church to schedule you an event to serve. Like look for opportunities to serve within your community, and look for ways that you can just step up and serve. And it may be small, it may be taking on a role in government. It could be a lot of different things, but it's like look for avenues to serve and just serve. Yeah.
Well, y'all do an excellent job of that. So thank you for being a light in our community. I cannot believe our time is almost up, but I have one more question that I want to ask you. Okay. What is one thing that is lightening your load? Okay.
So I think two things. So one is date night with my wife. And so it's something that thankfully our parents are here pretty close. They live in Rayville. Both our parents, Kirsten and I's parents, live there. And so they're able to keep the kids a lot. So we tried at least once a week going to date night, and that may exist, and we love going to the movies, may go to Target. That's not my favorite date night, but that's our favorite date night.
So
we got to meet in the middle. We got to meet in the middle there. And so I think some is that, and then other for me is fitness. And so I love to work out. I love to run. And for me, always that's been just kind of a release for me. When I'm stressed, when I'm, I don't know, to be disciplined in that area, it helps me spiritually. It just always has. And so for me, making sure I'm dating my wife and doing those things, and then fitness, running.
We just did a whole show on that about how the spiritual aspect of your life is connected to the physical aspect of your life, and you have to have both.
Yeah, well, I think it's that whole idea, and discipline equals freedom, and this in discipline of when I discipline my physical body, for me, and it translates spiritually. And so when I'm lazy in areas of my life, I see it trending in my time with Jesus. And so it's like, it's all interconnected, I think.
That's
and so for me, that's one of the ways that keeps me on track with being with Jesus, but also just physically, I just enjoy it. So
That's so good. Well, I have loved this show. Thank you for coming and being vulnerable and talking about the hard things, about discouragement and not giving up and not growing weary, but abiding in Him. And you've given us a lot to think about. I'm really going to chew on it. So I appreciate your insight on it.
It was awesome. It went by super fast.
It did. It did. Thanks, James.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to the Reflecting Light Show. We pray you got some hope and some light out of today's episode. And if you did, please subscribe to the show and also share with a friend who may need the light of Jesus Christ in his or her life. If you haven't gotten your copy of Made to Shine, you can do so by going to aprilrodgers.com. Go out and have a great week and be the light.